Hello? Yeah?
Basi of the sources. All right, before we start, we're going to be taking some housekeeping. Please kindly mute your mic in the webinar session, during the webinar session, and do well to use the chat box below if you have any question. We're sure to attend to all of them. And I want to assure you that this webinar is recorded. We're going to send it across to everyone at the end of the webinar. Once again, you're welcome to today's webinar, Reliable Data Protection for Today's IT Infrastructure. All right, before we start, let's quickly look at a quick introduction about Casper Technologies. Casper Technologies is an IT solution company that has been in existence for years now, helping organizations streamline their business processes and systems. We're working towards becoming the leading and preferred advanced IT solution company to help our valued customers. And we have dedicated ourselves in providing our customers with a safe haven to all their IT needs. And I want to show you that our services is all about the end-to-end security, the network infrastructure, the likes of backup solution. And we're partnering with best OEMs like Cisco, the likes of Sophos, Fortinet, to mention but a few. But Veeam, which is also there, is one of the things we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to be handing over to our colleague, my colleague Chisom, to take us to reliable data protection for today's IT infrastructure. Chisom, please, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us this morning. So, as my colleague mentioned, we're going to be looking at reliable data protection for today's IT infrastructure. We're going to look at a number of concepts and try to understand what we need to consider if you're trying to achieve reliable data protection. So before we continue, I would just like everyone to please confirm that they can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. So in business, disasters do happen all the time. And when you try to look at it from an IT perspective, there are a number of disasters that might affect your mission critical functions or applications as a business. So you might experience downtime for one reason or the other. It might be a power outage, it might be internet outage. You can experience downtime as a result of various reasons or various events. But it's important that as a business, you are able to maintain your critical functions, or you are able to still earn money while you might be dealing with that disaster, or while you might be attempting to recover from the situation that you found yourself in. So disaster recovery basically is an aspect of security planning that aims to help organizations shield themselves from the effects of significant negative events. So events that would possibly cause downtime or cause outages for your service or your IT infrastructure. So you're trying to effectively shield your organization from the negative effects of such events. So when you discuss disaster recovery, the next thing that comes to mind is business continuity. So as a business, you need to be able to maintain your essential functions during and after this disaster or these events have occurred. And that is all business continuity entails. So the ability for your business to still run effectively when you might have experienced a disaster. If we would maybe take an example, let's say your bank, let's say you're using GT Bank, and for one reason or the other, they had a service outage, and for a span of time, you could not use them. As a customer, you would, if it happened frequently, you would maybe start looking for another bank, or whatever transaction that you wanted to do. If you had another bank account that you could complete that transaction from, you will most likely do that from another bank. So in that period where GT is unable to service you and other customers, GT as a bank would have lost maybe the bank charges that they would have earned during that period. So for people like Jumia as well, that people have to come to their website to order for products, anytime they experience a service outage, they will lose a certain amount of money for the period that that service outage was occurring, or for the period that that service outage lasted. So essentially, if you're unable to mitigate these effects of a service outage to your business, it might affect the revenue of the business. So disaster recovery plays an important role in today's business. You have to protect against maybe disruption to your business. You can also continue to make money or earn revenue while you might be experiencing a negative event. You can also retain customer and shareholder confidence. So imagine if, as a service provider, you were maybe replicating your key business applications, and when you experience a downtime in maybe for a certain application, because it was being replicated, you were able to easily redirect your customers to your other site. And in that event, they most likely didn't notice that there was a service outage. So while other companies might be struggling to grapple these events, your customers and shareholders believe that you are able to handle these issues effectively, and most likely don't even think that you experience service outages. Then you can also increase profitability, and in situations where you are running your business in partnership with other companies or other vendors, you can also increase the value of your company as a service provider to them. So for each time a disaster occurs, this diagram shows a summary of everything that would have happened during that event. So usually for any company who maybe has service level agreements that they give to their customers, or they have service level objectives that they have as part of their business goals, they would most likely have a recovery point objective and a recovery time objective. A number of times, these things are implied on businesses based on the sectors that they operate in. If you are operating in a bank, for example, there's no reason that you should be unable to account for the activities of maybe the past 24 hours or the past 12 hours. So you would factor in all of these considerations when you are deciding what your recovery point should be. So that would be the target period. The recovery point objective would be the target period of, let's say, the safety net for how far back you can go with your company's data. If you experienced an outage and you could restore for maybe your backup, what is the earliest date you should always seek to be able to restore from at any given time? If your business allows you to be able to deal with 24 hours, then your recovery point objective should be 24 hours from when the disaster should have maybe occurred. If maybe you have only a 10 minutes window, your recovery point objective would be that 10 minutes window that you can afford to not account for what would have happened within that 10 minutes. So we are assuming that you were having normal usage and everything was working fine. So you had a backup system in place that was taking backups. And then up until the time when maybe you experienced this negative event and you had a service outage. So during the period that it takes you to react to that service outage, and how long it will take you to get back to at least basic functionality. Basic functionality will be your mission critical infrastructure. That will be things that your business cannot afford to run without, or your organization cannot afford to run without. There will be applications that your organization runs that anytime that application is not running, your firm is not in business at that moment until that application is running again. So you would have to take into consideration all those applications that you need to effectively run your business or serve your customers efficiently. So whatever applications those are the things you would usually aim to achieve basic functionality in immediately you experience a disaster within your infrastructure. So your recovery time objective should be how long it will take you to restore. Let's say you had your backups running properly. How long it should take you to restore a working backup or restore a working infrastructure that can serve your customers or help your business achieve their goals. So how long will it take you to get that backup up and running? How many minutes do you need to restore the backup and get back to basic functionality? Then after you've achieved your basic functionality again, you then attempt to bring up your whole IT infrastructure, and once you've been able to confirm that you're fully recovered from whatever event it was that you were experiencing, you should be able to resume your normal backup or replication functions again. So the key or the most important factor in your recovery timeline is that you had a backup of your system or a backup of the data that your applications were making use of. And we had the ability to restore that backup with ease. So a disaster recovery plan basically have a policy statement which will itemize maybe the plans or the different sections of the business, then the main goals of the plan, what exactly you expect to achieve by making use of this plan. You should also have maybe details of your key personnel and members of the disaster recovery team, then description of the disaster response actions immediately following an incident. So you will need to have itemized the services that you need to bring up as soon as possible, or the critical services that must be running for your business to function effectively. Then you would also need the actions or the steps that should be taken to bring back those resources online. You will also require maybe a diagram of the entire network and also a diagram of the network for your recovery site. So if your recovery site could only cover for those critical functions, you will need to adjust and build the plan in such a way that you can easily bring back those critical applications or servers online. Bring back those applications or servers online. Then in some cases, you might need directions on how to get to the recovery site and the software and probably documentation for how the recovery should take place under ideal circumstances. You will also have templates from maybe the vendors that you work with and documentation. to aid you in recovering your critical functions effectively. Then in situations where maybe you are required by law to make disclosures to either members of the public or government regulation or government regulators, you also need to factor all of that into your plan. So as much as it is relatively easy, I won't say it's so easy, but to an extent, it's easy to draw up these plans. But there's no need of drawing up a plan that you might not be able to implement. So in developing this strategy, you need to cover the costs that it will take to implement, how much is your organization willing to spend to run the infrastructure that would support your disaster recovery plans. What amount of synchronization do you need? If there are maybe certain departments that must be involved in the process of the disaster recovery planning, you need to ensure that even when you are executing this plan, the departments are in sync and recovery efforts are in tune for each department. Then you will also need to identify the risk. So it's a challenge, the risk of maybe where your disaster recovery site is, or factor in the risks that might come with where you choose to be your disaster recovery location. So there might be constraints such as distance between maybe where your office is and where the disaster recovery site is. There might also be other constraints that might affect your ability to execute the plan effectively. So you need to take all of that into consideration. So before we continue, there's a brief poll that we have to take. So it's just a simple question to find out whether you currently have a disaster recovery plan. So we'll leave it open for about a minute before we look at what the answers are. So for the poll, we had 54% of people who participated said they do not have any disaster recovery plan in place at the moment, while the 46% said they had already. So at least I hope that one of the takeaways you would have had today is that you might need to implement a disaster recovery plan in your organization. So let's continue. So last year we had the pandemic and it's changed. It changed maybe the IT landscape or how businesses looked at having their IT infrastructure that they use in their business or for their operations. So last year, as a result of the pandemic, we had a 60% increase in the use of cloud services. We also had a 48% increase in the usage of software as a service offerings. And then there was also a boom in the ransomware industry. So we noticed that if you've also been following the news, you'd have seen that there have been increased cases of ransomware incidents. So another thing to notice that from a survey that was taken, a large number of organizations expect to also increase their cloud investment. Cloud has given companies the ability to innovate at a quicker rate and also achieve much more than they would have been able to do if they had to attempt maybe the same deployments with if they attempted to do the same deployment on-prem. So there's like a large gap or a gulf between what you can achieve with the cloud and what it will cost you to achieve the same thing with on-prem servers or a private data center. So one important thing to note is that the cloud is changing how data protection currently works, and there's a need for businesses to be able to modernize their data protection infrastructure or data protection methods. So whatever it is in place, there's a need for you to ensure that it can adapt to the changes that we're currently experiencing. So for Africa, for example, there's there was a 74% increase in cloud usage last year. So ranging from maybe infrastructure as a service offerings or products to software as a service. I think the larger portion of it was the adoption of software as a service products. So in today's world, the reality for legacy backup is that 34% of all backup jobs fail, and 34% of restore jobs also fail. So most times that leaves you with about 50% failure of recovery. So each time you maybe have an incident, the reality of today's of legacy backup or traditional backup as we know it is that there's a 58% chance that the recovery of that system might fail or might not go on smoothly. So you need to factor that into your decisions and understand that traditional backup solutions or traditional backup infrastructure do not meet or struggle to meet up with today's requirements. So, and when you put it or put two and two together and also consider that 23% of all servers will most likely have at least one unplanned outage, it leaves you with an estimate that's not so good. Because imagine if that 23% happens to be one of your critical servers or one of the servers that run your critical applications. So you need to be able to grapple these challenges better and modernize your backup infrastructure. So why do you need to change? Why do we need to even consider changing it? After all, the traditional backup still gives us something. But the things you should consider is one, you can achieve a lower cost for your backup and recovery operations. So before, the legacy backup, for some of them, you might have to maybe buy a physical device and then maybe you are stuck with that particular device or that particular vendor's products, and you can't really switch from one provider to another. In some cases, it's also troublesome for your IT team to handle their own task and also be able to cater for your disaster recovery needs or your backup needs. So to enable your IT team to be more efficient, you should consider modernizing the data protection infrastructure that you have already. It also enables for people who already have specific teams that deal with data protection. It enables them to also achieve a higher level of efficiency and can also allow you to lower the costs for your storage. So Forrester has a buyer's guide for what you should effectively look for if you wanted to, if you were looking for a modern backup solution. So in summary, what they advise that you should look for is that that solution should be scalable. You should be able to scale up in future.
You have the technical services, then you have a consultant.
You should be able to scale up in future to meet your needs or the needs of your organization. So if your organization grows, this modern solution that you're looking for should be able to scale up to meet those new needs that your firm might have. Then there's also the factor of speed. So the lower time it will take you to restore your backup or even complete the backup jobs in the first place. Then whatever solution that you're also using should be reliable. I think that's the most obvious thing to look for. So the solution should be reliable. You should be able to optimize for time, cost, and storage. So how much it will cost you to maintain the whole data protection infrastructure, what your storage costs will be like, if there are costs that are controllable by you, and as then also not maybe compromising and not being able to meet up with the time objectives that you have previously had. And then whatever solution that you're having needs to give you the opportunity to be able to perform granular recovery or whole site recovery. So granular recovery might mean in the recovery process, you might need just one particular file. You might need just one particular folder, maybe just a certain portion of the whole backup and not the full backup. So there are sometimes that I might not need to perform a full recovery operation. I might just need to pick out a particular file. So being able to do that is also something that you should look for. And whatever solution that you're getting needs to be able to automatically test that the backups that you have been taking are recoverable. So making use of modern data protection comes with its own promises. There are all the prospects. So you can be able to achieve full resiliency for your business IT infrastructure. You can be sure that you can protect all your workloads, ranging from maybe personal computers all the way to your servers and other IT infrastructure that you might have. Then you also need to, while you achieve protecting all your workloads, you also need to be able to reduce your operational costs and drive guaranteed recovery. Then in some cases, you might need to reuse data. For example, for those who have development teams, you might need to have maybe a development environment, and it might pay you if you are able to use real data to test the applications that are maybe in your development pipeline. And modern data protection also helps you to drive productivity, and it also helps you to meet up with compliance requirements. So if there are maybe compliance requirements for your industry, or there are compliance requirements from your regulator, you can easily cater for all of this by making use of a modern data protection system or infrastructure. So for your backups, there's like a best practice, let's call it best practice. So there's a best practice for you to be able to claim or say that your backup infrastructure is effective. So that best practice is that you have at least 3 different copies of your data. You make use of at least 2 different media. So it can be tapes, it can be hard drives, it can be cloud storage. So the last requirement is that one of your backup copies should be offsite. So it might be at, for example, I think we have rack centers, so you might decide to keep your one copy of your backup in your center. You might decide to also make use of the cloud if you are allowed to do that in your industry. So you might decide to make that one offsite copy to be a cloud, to be stored in the cloud or stored at an offsite location. So there's another poll for us to take just to help us check out how we are faring at the moment. So do you have different copies of your data? So we have about 30 seconds left to take the poll. Okay, so let's check the results for the poll. We have 69% saying yes, that they have different copies of their data, and another 31% saying they don't. So the reason why you should have maybe 3 different copies is that just having a backup is not enough. So there's the possibility that if you're taking just one backup, what if the hard drive that you're using failed? But if you had maybe 3 copies, at least 3 copies, you have more options to work with. So if one of them didn't work, most likely the other will work. And then when you're talking about different media, for example, you can maybe be sure that maybe the issues that might come with storing your backup on a hard disk might not come, or a NAS drive might not affect tapes. So there's a need for you to take all of this into consideration and probably improve on your current backup infrastructure. So let's move on. So for a modern backup solution, one of the solutions that meets all the requirements or all the boxes that you need to tick is Veeam. So if I'm maybe being specific, Veeam would allow you to have 3 times shorter backup windows. You can back up 3 times more. You can even back up as many times as possible. So the choice is yours. So as many times as you want to back up with Veeam, you have the opportunity to do that. And in a large number of cases, customers have been able to recover from ransomware at 0 cost. And then you also have people, over 55% of Veeam customers being able to, or there's a 55% chance that you will be able to meet your recovery point objective, and you also be able to meet your recovery time objectives with Veeam. So Veeam can help you to cater for a wide range of IT infrastructure needs when it comes to backup. So all the way from your physical devices, maybe your Windows PCs or systems running Linux, even NAS drives. Veeam also has the capability to help you back up NAS drives if you have that need. Then it also caters to virtual environments. So your VMware, your Hyper-V environments, you can cater to your virtual machines making use of Veeam. Then you can also perform application-aware backups and have backups of databases, things like Active Directory, and even Kubernetes environments. And for software as a service, Veeam currently caters for Office 365, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams. And then for cloud, Veeam caters for at least the big three or the big four. Veeam currently has native functionality with those cloud providers, so AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and IBM. So Veeam has native capability, meaning that there's ease for you to use Veeam to perform backup operations in those environments. Then you can also be able to achieve data reuse, orchestration for your backup process, monitoring and analytics. So being able to monitor the backup jobs that you have maybe been running and also perform some analytical tasks on them. Then you can also replicate, especially for your virtual environments. You don't only have the option to backup, you can also replicate your virtual machines to a different environment. So you can have a failover in case of downtime, and you can also have a failback in case you need to move from the replication environment back to your production environment. I don't know whether there are any questions at this point. Does anybody have any question at this point, or I can move on? Okay, if there are no questions, I think we will move on.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good morning.
Good
Please,
morning.
can you explain better on this Veeam capability on the cloud, if you don't cover that?
Okay, so I think we'll still get to that because of the webinar. There's a portion that explains the capabilities of the cloud better, or the capabilities of Veeam for the cloud better. Would you have any other thing besides that?
No, for now. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we can move on.
Sorry, I have a question, please, before I go. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so for the SaaS offering, Veeam only covers for Office 365, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams. They don't cover other applications that are not listed here.
So which other applications? Okay, yes. So for now, I know that they are currently working towards being able to support other SaaS applications, but for now, Veeam is able to cover the Office 365 offerings, and you can also perform file level recoveries or file level restoration. Does that cover your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move forward. So with Veeam, we're able to also go a step further from the 3-2-1 rule that we had before. So with Veeam, you can take 2 more steps or add 2 more rules to it. So with Veeam, you can achieve immutability for your backups, and you can make your backups maybe air gapped. So the way it works is you might be taking backups of your critical infrastructure or even your whole workload, but you might have issues dealing with if there was already a ransomware or a malware already in the backup that you've taken. You might have issues restoring that if you were using traditional backup options. You might have issues restoring that backup, or you might restore it and the malware is still in it and is still able to maybe take actions that you might not like. So with Veeam, you can have immutable backups that changes cannot be made to. So Veeam takes advantage of a security feature within Linux that makes the OS immutable. So changes can be made. And if, for example, there's maybe a malware within the backup, it cannot maybe take an action. So if maybe it was ransomware, for example, that was meant to encrypt everything, it can't encrypt those immutable or air-gapped backups. Then you can also be sure that there are no errors after backup. So you can verify the recoverability of your backups. So you can be sure whether this backup is recoverable. You can also test that the backups that you are taking are usable. So for the Veeam products or the Veeam products offering, we have Veeam Backup Essentials, which is friendly or is made for small and medium businesses. So it allows you to meet up with the basic needs that a small or medium business will have when it comes to backup. So you can back up, recover, and monitor up to 50 physical, virtual, and cloud workloads, including VMware and Hyper-V, all from one console. So that gives you ease of management. You don't need to, there are some traditional backup options that you might need to go to each maybe endpoint or server to check and confirm that the backups were successful, that the backups were still running. But with Veeam, you can monitor all of that from one admin console. So for small and medium businesses and even larger businesses, you can it helps you reduce the time that you have spent with maybe backup solutions that we can refer to as outdated. So it also helps you to perform instant recovery, especially for virtual machines. And it's software defined, so there's no hardware that you need to buy. There's no vendor lock-in. You won't say, oh, the only thing that works with this is this particular vendor's server or this particular vendor's product. So you have the choice and the freedom to choose and to match whatever systems you want to put in place for your backup. Then it also helps for businesses. These days, I've mentioned previously that businesses are accelerating their move to the cloud, but not only to the cloud, but to multi-cloud deployments. So where you make use of different cloud vendors for your deployments or for your cloud infrastructure. So it allows you to also protect and transfer workloads easily from one environment to the other. It also allows you to enhance your data protection strategy. So with Veeam, you have the option to configure your compliance needs to the system. So you can configure your compliance needs. So if your regulator requires that maybe backups are taken every 2 days, or that you have a 12-hour window or a 1-hour window, you can build a sort of, let's say, in-house compliance system to be sure that you are complying with those regulatory requirements. So in summary, the Veeam Backup Essentials gives you fast recovery, powerful file protection, the option for data portability from one cloud provider to the other. You also have the option of storage flexibility, and then there's built-in security and the ability to monitor your backup infrastructure. And more importantly, you have a technical support team that is available 24/7. So the feature I mentioned before about the hardened Linux repository that allows you to make your backups immutable. So you keep your data safe with immutable and malware safe storage repositories for backups and prevent malicious encryption and deletion. So in some cases, there have been cases where backups that are taken, because maybe they were not immutable, the malware could still act on the backup. So by the time maybe the company now needed to restore from that backup, there was nothing to restore, the backup was not usable. So with Veeam, there are 91 needs or 91 requirements that you can meet. There are 91 options or things that you can cater for with Veeam. And specifically for Office 365, if you make use of Veeam backup for Microsoft Office 365, you can eliminate the risk of losing access and control over your Office 365 data. So I know, for example, to a large extent, Office 365 is highly reliable, and most of the time is also highly available. So they hardly have service outages and all of that. But you don't have, there are some things you don't have control over. For example, they give you the option to maintain backups, a backup of the information that you have in Office 365, but there's like a limit. There's how long they can go. After a file is deleted, there's also a period which the file stays before it is deleted permanently. And you know, sometimes in businesses, there might be information that was maybe in an email months ago, maybe a year ago as well, and maybe it was already deleted. And if there's maybe a legal issue or a regulatory issue, you have nothing to fall back to or fall back on. But with Veeam, you have the option to configure and store your data for as long as you want to store it, as far as it's still within your requirements. And Office 365 also gives you the option to maybe place like a legal hold on your files, where Office 365 would ignore the initial configuration and keep that data for longer than the required time, or keep that person's information for longer than the required time. But you have to take into consideration that you can't place maybe your entire company's files on legal hold, and you won't also place files on legal hold forever. So you need something that can serve you well, and something that will also give you the option for granular recovery, where you can recover maybe just the specific file or the email or the information that you needed from Office 365. So for the cloud backup solution, so there's Veeam backup for Microsoft Azure, AWS, and Office 365. So you have the capability to, and Google Cloud platform. So with Veeam backup for cloud, you have the opportunity to use software that is built for provider that you are working with, software that natively functions with the system that is available within your service provider's infrastructure. For example, if you were using Azure, there are some backup solutions that, yes, you can back up your Azure virtual machines or infrastructure, the things you need to back up. But there's a limitation, or maybe you can't remove it from Azure. The backup is still within Azure. But with Veeam backup for Office 365 or AWS, whichever option you're using, you have the ability to, if need be, move your backup from one provider system to another. For example, I'm aware that natively it is almost impossible to restore the snapshot of an Azure virtual machine in AWS. But with Veeam, you also have the ability to do that if you want to be able to do that, to be able to move from one environment to another provider's environment. So one question that might come to mind when dealing with cloud backup, or when someone is saying, oh, you might need to back up your cloud environment or the things you have in your environment, one important thing is that each time you make use of a cloud provider, there is a shared responsibility model that all of them have, where they tell you what they are responsible for and what you are responsible for and what their job is, what your own role is in the whole agreement. So all of them, in fact, offer native backup capabilities that you can back up within their systems, which is not that much of an issue for any of the backup, for any of the cloud providers. But where the issue comes from is if they are responsible, in summary, the summary of the shared responsibility model is that your cloud provider is responsible for the underlying infrastructure and maintenance of the underlying infrastructure, Can everybody hear me now? I'm sorry for the break.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Where we stopped. I was saying that.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, good. So I was saying that with Veeam, okay, I think I was talking about the shared responsibility model, and I was saying that while you have the option to make maybe backups within your cloud provider, you might not be able to restore in another person's environment. except if you are using maybe third-party software like Istio and the likes. So another thing about the shared responsibility mode, you are responsible for everything that you put in the environment, and your cloud is only responsible for the underlying infrastructure and making sure that they follow the regulatory guidelines or the best practices that you're required to follow to run that infrastructure. But you are responsible for every other thing that is inside. So if you had a virtual machine and for one reason or the other, the virtual machine stopped working, or there was a problem with it, or it got hacked by a threat actor, for example, Microsoft doesn't have any responsibility in all of that. AWS doesn't have any responsibility in all of that. So it is your own responsibility to ensure that we or handle the risk that come with making use of cloud environments. So if, for example, you know that maybe you might need to maintain a multi-cloud approach from the onset, you need to take into consideration what you need to achieve that, and if it is within your budget or what your company can afford. So, and if backup, for example, was in a specific zone. So imagine, I know with cloud providers, you have zones and regions in most cases. So if it was in a specific zone and maybe your backup and your backup and the actual VM was in the same zone. Imagine if that zone went down entirely, or maybe there was maintenance going on and you could not restore that virtual machine to another place. I know sometimes they try to warn, but there are certain risks that come with just relying on the native cloud backup option that your provider gives to you. Let's continue. So So we are almost at the end of the webinar. We'll be rounding off soon. We just have a few more points to cover. So another we did, I think I mentioned at some point that you need to be able to plan and optimize your data protection infrastructure. So Veeam 1 allows you to achieve that. So it delivers the ability to intelligently monitor your backup infrastructure, to also report and automate a number of the processes. So when you've also integrated your compliance requirements into the system, it enables you to before they even begin. So before you may have had the opportunity to notice those problems, Veeam gives you the opportunity to have visibility into your entire backup infrastructure and also monitor and manage everything that you need to. So one of the key capabilities of Veeam is proactive alerting. It can also help you to estimate the charges that you might be required to pay if you were making use of. It can also help you to calculate the cost of storage. If, for example, you were making use of maybe a third-party storage service like maybe Azure Storage, or you're making use of AWS and the likes. So you have the option to calculate your billing, what your billing cost will come up to. And finally, we have Cas10, which enables you to deal with your Kubernetes backup and application mobility. So in most environments, Kubernetes is almost like the best thing since sliced bread for development teams these days, and it helps them to achieve a high level of orchestration and also high availability for the applications that they are deploying. But there are some little problems they need to take into consideration with the Kubernetes environments and being able to move your applications from one place to the other. So Cat10 allows you to move from your native backup of your Kubernetes environment or your Kubernetes nodes to having moving from maybe a policy-driven approach to a behavior-driven approach where the platform identifies possible problems and attempts to mitigate them or notify you of those problems. So it's also, you can also integrate it with maybe factor in the service level agreements that you may have had for people who are using your platform. So I believe we have come to the end of my presentation. I don't know whether any other person has, whether there are questions. And if I was able to answer the questions for the person that was asking about, for the person who was asking about Veeam and cloud environments. So are there any questions? So if there are no questions, I think I will.
So thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you everyone for joining. Presentation slide of this webinar will be passed across to you. Do not hesitate to send any email regarding any questions that you have, any inquiries. Number on the link that you can get in touch on, or somebody you can talk to. So I think that's all for today. So thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Thanks for all for joining. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.